Wow, cool music, huh? I like that. Slide guitar and got somebody dealing cards on there too. Not that I hang around card shops all the time. I don't, but still, that goes right along with that. And really, it goes right along with the message series that we have planned out for you for the next month or so. It's called Dealing with It. Dealing with it. You know, they're dealing cards. We're talking about dealing with it. And there are several issues that we want to talk about to you and with you over the next few weeks that we believe will be really helpful to you as you navigate life and as you navigate this relationship with God that you have. You know, today's message is about burnout, and it's something which affects a lot of people. And maybe you've gone through it, maybe you're going through it right now, or you know somebody that's going through it right now. We want to address those issues that go along with that. By the way, my name is Lee Robinson. I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and it's my privilege to be able to share with you this morning. Last week, as we were finishing up our amazing series, Brandon spoke. Man, he just did such an awesome job, and we were very proud of him. I hope you had the opportunity to tell him that afterwards, too. He really does a dynamic job, and we're blessed to have him working with our youth, but also speaking for us here as well. Yeah, he deserves a round of applause. Well, you know, this morning, we have been thankful that we have not been going through some of the stuff that people up north have been going through. We have some pictures for you to show you how, we can call this freeze out, okay? This is truly freeze out. And we have a few more pictures for you. Minus 34 degrees. Now, I don't know what that is Fahrenheit, but man, that's cold. Let me tell you that. Okay, there's another one. That is not Siesta Beach, just to let you know, okay? If you are up north most of the time and you're down here right now, you are saying to yourself, I am so glad that I am not up there experiencing all the cold weather they had. In fact, I think it's kind of interesting that at one time in some places it was 100 degrees warmer here than what it was somewhere up north. Isn't that amazing? 100 degrees difference for people. You know, when you get into these kind of freeze-out conditions, there are kinds of things that happen, like routines are interrupted, and seasonal affective disorder can kick in, and dangerous conditions can set in, and there are all these warnings that, like, stay inside, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. That's just the way it is when you get into a freeze-out situation like that. But the other phenomenon that I want to talk to you about today is that burnout principle, that condition, that situation that happens in people's lives that creeps up on them and begins to control their lives in some ways that are pretty powerful. It's the total opposite of freeze out, and it is burnout. You've probably heard the old phrase, I would rather burn out than rust out. Maybe you've even said that before. I've probably said that before. But you know, you think about it, the idea behind burning out versus rusting out sounds like you're inactive, you know. My dad has this old truck sitting out on our property up in Indiana, and a lot of people come out and get their pictures taken in front of it. We've had weddings out close to it and everything, but it's just a rusty old truck, you know. It's like from the 40s out there. It's cool looking, but there's a lot of rust on it because it just sits there all the time. And so that's the idea of rusting out, just inactivity. Burning out is the idea of hard charging, working hard, giving yourself to the task and everything. But when you think about it, burning out and rusting out both still include out, don't they? You are still out either way. And what we really need to focus on today is staying in the game. Staying in the kind of life that God is calling us to live. Staying in a life which is productive and yet not burning you out at the same time. Now, you might be asking, what is burnout? Let me illustrate it this way. This week, you may have read about this sinkhole that was found in Pembroke Pines, Florida, down around Fort Lauderdale. There were some people who discovered this near a roadside, and they called out the public works group there to figure out what was going on, thinking maybe they need to make sure that everybody around there is safe because this sinkhole might be forming. And then they discovered that there was this power cord not very far from there that led back to a wooded area. And they discovered that this was a tunnel that was actually heading towards a bank on the other side of the road. And so they called in the FBI, and the FBI came out to investigate. They found this hole is about 2 or 3 feet wide, and as they began to look at it, they discovered there were some things inside of it. and there were tools in there. There were muddy boots in there. There was a ladder and a stool in there, and there was a small Honda generator in there. Can you imagine that? One of the FBI guys that was called in said these people were using pickaxes and a small little wagon. He said, I would like to say I saw something like this in the movies. However, this hole is so small, it's unique, and there have been no arrests made yet at this point. Now, what was taking place was there was this probable invasion which was taking place into the bank. It was unnoticeable by the people who were working there, but it was going to be something that was going to be too late if they did not discover it beforehand. And someone described burnout as an invasion into your mind and your emotions. I like to say that pretty much describes what a burnout is like. And the reason I can say that pretty much describes it is because I went through a burnout back in 1985 and 86. And I did that for about a year's time. I'd been working very hard here at the church, and I was preaching a Sunday morning sermon. I was writing another sermon for Sunday evenings and preaching that. And I was working with the youth group after that time. And on Wednesday nights, I was teaching the Bible study, and I was calling on people nearly every day. And we lived at the parsonage back over here, so we really had not much space between us and where I was doing most of my work activity. And the phone that we had in our house was the same phone number as what was here in the church building. And there was no answering machine. And we got phone calls all day long, into the evening, late at night sometimes. They just could not get away from anything around here. I got involved in different boards for Christian agencies. I was playing in a band here at church. And one day on vacation, we were down in Chokoloskee, which is down around Naples area. And I just started feeling like my stomach just kind of felt funny. It just kind of hurt. It bothered me. And I thought, man, is this just today, or what's going on here? And so I went through that all day long, and then the next day I woke up and it was still there again, and the next day it was still there again, and I found that I didn't feel right within myself. Something just wasn't quite as it was supposed to be, and I began to wonder if I was ever going to feel like myself again. I began to wonder if I was ever going to feel normal again in that regard. And you know what? I got scared to preach when I came back. I was nervous about that and wasn't sure if I could do it or not. And I love people. I love to be around people. But at that time, I just felt like isolating myself away from people. I didn't feel like I wanted to really be around anyone that much. And I got less engaged with my children. I got real clingy with Sherry. I mean, she couldn't even do the dishes without me standing right there next to her. She was probably just saying, "You're driving me nuts. Get away from me for a while." I was prescribed some medication, but I hated to take it because it reminded me I needed to take it. You know? In other words, I had this situation in my life I was not happy with. I was not proud of, and so I was defiant about that medicine. I didn't want to take that medicine because it reminded me I had a need that I could not control at that point. Eventually, I got better. And I want to share some things with you that I learned in the process of going through all that, things that helped me. But I also want to tell you something that hurt me. And what hurt me was that I set myself up for burnout. For some reason, I felt like I needed to prove myself. I needed to show that I was being a good minister. I needed to show that I was accomplishing what I was supposed to accomplish. I needed to show that I was a hard worker. And every time I get a pat on the back, it would just kind of be like saying, sick 'em to a dog. You know, I'd want to go out and do even more just to continue proving myself. And so what happened is I really put myself behind the 8 ball. And I gave myself not very much emotional space. And I began to just really wilt inside. I was not the person I had used to be. And so it bothered me a lot. And eventually, proving myself became a monster that began to eat up all my joy. Now, there were times I had good times and I laughed and everything, but I still had this nagging feeling inside me that things were not right. And my stomach would remind me of that as well. You know, the Mayo Clinic says ignored or unaddressed job burnout can have significant consequences, like excessive stress or fatigue, insomnia, sadness, anger, or irritability, alcohol or substance abuse and misuse, heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, vulnerability to illnesses. Now, thankfully, I made it through burnout without it burning me up, but it was the worst time of my life. And I learned some things during that time that I think would be helpful for anyone else who might be either in burnout or on the verge of burnout right now. And my guess is that some of you are either there or just about there right now. And you need to hear this message, and I wish that I would have heard this message back about 1984 or so, and it would have saved me a lot of heartache and a lot of problem. The first thing, if you're following along with your outline on the back of your bulletin, burnout is a sign that I am out of balance and in need of realignment. It's a sign that I'm out of balance and in need of realignment. Have you ever had some tires that were out of balance and needed to be realigned? Let's have a couple pictures up here to show you what that looks like. You can see that on one side there's still pretty good tread, but on the other side it's being worn off. It's uneven the way it's being worn there. So those tires are not going to last a whole lot longer in the condition that they are in. Look at that one right there, how badly it has been worn. You can even see the threads or the core on that one side right there, where that's all been worn off because of it being out of balance and needing alignment of some sort. When your life is out of balance, you are wearing yourself off and out in ways that God did not design for you to be. You are doing that. The Bible tells us about a guy named Moses. Most of us have heard about Moses before. He's the famous guy that Charlton Heston was patterned after in the Ten Commandments. But let me tell you about a story from Moses' life that goes right along with this that's so important for us. Moses, one day, when he was out with the people of Israel, they'd already gotten through Egypt and they were out in the wilderness right now. One day, his father-in-law, Jethro, comes to visit him. Now, this is not the Jethro from NCIS or from the Beverly Hillbillies, either one, okay? This is a different Jethro, and he comes out there, and Moses is happy to see him. He brings him into the tent, and he begins to share with him about what God has been doing there for the people of Israel. Talks about how these plagues had come into Egypt and had eventually set the people of Israel free. Talks about crossing over the Red Sea or through the Red Sea with water on either side. Talks about a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day and God's presence with them. Excuse me. And a variety of other things that God had been doing, providing manna for them and quail for them. And as Jethro is listening to this, he's saying, wow, God is doing an awesome job through you. Wonderful news. And so Moses has been very happy to share all that with him. They all go to sleep that night. The next day, Moses is out with this table and probably a chair there, and he's got this long line of people who are all lined up, and they are bringing their problems and their disputes and their issues to Moses to decide on what is the right course of action. Whether this person is the right person or that person is the right person, who is right, who is wrong in these cases, what God's will is in these situations. And Jethro, when he gets up, he goes out, he sees Moses sitting out there with this long line of people, and he says something is not right here. Something is not right. And so he goes up and he begins to talk with Moses out there. He begins to say to him these words, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who can come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it." Jethro is essentially saying to Moses that his life was out of balance, that he needed realignment, that he needed to begin to share the load with other people. Isn't it funny? Moses has been telling his father-in-law all that God has been doing in the lives of all those people, and yet Moses feels like he's got to spend all day long, every day, settling these disputes. It's almost like he's saying, God, you can't get it all done without my help right here. It's also interesting as well that when Jethro gets there, he brings two people with him. He brings Moses' wife with him and their two sons. And you know what? There is not one word in Exodus 18 about how Moses goes up and hugs his wife and kisses her. There's not one word about how he spends some time with his sons. Instead, when his father-in-law gets here, he hugs him, he kisses him, he kneels down in front of him, welcomes him into the tent, leaves everybody else outside. There's something wrong with that picture. Moses has forgotten the most significant relationships in his life. And that's one of the things that burnout can begin to do. It can begin to mess with your priorities. It can begin to make you think that work or some other thing is the most important thing. And those relationships can be put on hold for a while. And what happens is they become almost as useless as an old, worn-out tire right here. Jethro's final words of advice are significant for Moses. It says, if you do this, in other words, you get other people involved, and God commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses was a caring person. He felt responsible. He wanted the best for other people. Felt like he was doing God's work, but he was trying to do too much. He was trying to cram too much into his already busy schedule. And he kept it up. And he was becoming useless like one of those tires. Thankfully, Moses was humble, and he listened to his father-in-law, and he began to divide up the load among a whole bunch of other people. And those people settled almost all the cases unless they were extremely important cases. And guess what? Moses was not the one who decided if it was an extremely important case or not. Those people would say, we can't handle it, we'll have to take it to Moses. So Moses was not involved near as much as he was before. His load lightened up. He worked smarter. He became mentally and physically better in the process. And you might wonder, well, how did that work out in the long run? What began to happen? Well, almost immediately, we find that when Moses began to share the load, that he began to be more open to God's leading in his life. And as we read the scripture, we find that God began to talk with him. He said, I'm going to come down on Mount Sinai. I don't want anyone to even come close to the mountain, but there was going to be this thunder, lightning, cloud, smoke, everything else there, while God's presence was there. And then when that was done, when all the people got a chance to see God's presence there, not seeing him, but just knowing that he was there, then Moses got called up on that mountain for 45 days. And guess what God did during that 45 days? He gave Moses the 10 Commandments. He gave Moses a lot of the law. Moses came down, saw the people were celebrating by worshiping a golden calf, tore up the golden calf, made them all drink the gold that had been a part of that golden calf, and he laid down the law on his people at that point. His relationship with God was opened up because he was freed up from all the responsibilities that he had taken on himself. And I wonder sometimes if we get so busy that we miss out on God's best for us, what God really wants to do for us, because we feel like we're busy doing the most important things. When in reality, God says, your priorities are out of whack right here. You are getting worn down like that old tire. Let's get you realigned right here with what is going to help you in that regard. So we find here that there are some warning signs that can begin to happen that we need to be aware of, and we begin to, and they'll help us to begin to change. So we find, first of all, that if our work is our priority in that regard, that we have probably, there's nothing wrong with having a priority of work, but getting it out of balance is not good. You push yourself harder for self-approval or the approval of others. You are becoming like a squeezed balloon. You keep putting pressure in a certain area, forcing air into other areas that make them just about ready to pop. Family tension, risky choices, making poor choices, neglecting what's most important, even thinking that God can't get everything done without your help. You're working or going as much or more, but actually accomplishing less. You can't relax or enjoy life. Things aren't as funny as they should be. You're impatient. You're irritable about interruptions. People are a bother to you and are draining you. You might be self-medicating. You find yourself sad or angry or irritable. Little things that you hardly noticed before now get to you. You try to be everything to everyone. And in the age of social media, you could be falling into the trap of comparison, looking at what everybody else is doing on Facebook and thinking your life does not measure up to what their life is, and there's a sadness and a sense of lacking worth that can creep into your life and begin to help with that burnout process that you're starting to go through. Friend, God would say to you, take a step back. He has created this thing called Sabbath. He has created this thing called Sabbath. He's saying, get your priorities straight. Ask him for wisdom and listen to voices of wisdom, either through his word or through a trusted individual. Get in balance. Secondly, burnout's a sign that I need to refill my tank. Burnout is a sign I need to refill my tank. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you have a car that when the gas is getting low in the tank, that there's a chime or there's a little light that comes on your dashboard to let you know that's happening? How many of you didn't even know that was even there, okay? My guess is you're like my wife, because if it gets about half full, she's getting it filled back up again. She's like that with her battery in her phone. It's down to 80%. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm in trouble now. I got to plug it back in, There are people that are like that, That's just the way it is sometimes. Now, for me, I get down to about 3% on my phone, thinking I can still do just a little bit more. And when the chime goes off in my vehicle, I can push this little button that says info on there, and I can say, oh, still got 34 miles to go. No problem. I can just keep on doing it. How many of you are like me in that regard? You understand, don't you, okay? You understand that's the way it is sometimes, okay? Well, there's a sign for us that we need to refill our tank when that's happening right there. And it's so common for people to be running low or even on fumes in our lives that we deplete our supply of good fuel and unfortunately fill ourselves with so much other stuff that can begin to sink us. In the 19th century, there was this guy. His name was Plimsoll. It was Samuel Plimsoll. And at the advent of insurance in the 19th century, he was really concerned about this incentive for ship owners, because some of them were purposely sinking their own ships and collecting the insurance money. The practice became so widespread by so many, and it killed so many merchant seamen, this over-insured and overloaded vessels became known as coffin ships. Plimsoll applied Christian faith and a biblical view of justice to this issue, and in 1868 he announced that he would do all in his power to put an end to the unseaworthy ships owned by the greedy and the unscrupulous. So Plimsoll crusaded for the legislation to prevent that kind of thing from happening. In 1873, under his leadership, Parliament passed the Merchant Shipping Act, which required every ship that was going to go out with any kind of load in it, that it had to have this line that was painted on the side of the ship. It's called the Plimsoll line. And it's painted around the hull, and from then on to this day, ships have had to display this Plimsoll mark, a load line, painted clearly on their hulls, showing how deep they can safely sit in the water and preventing them from overloading. If the ship is below the water line, then the owners get fined. You know what happens is we try to load ourselves with all kinds of other stuff, and what we need is a Plimsoll line in our schedule saying, wait a minute, you have overloaded your life. You need to remove a few things, because if you do not remove those things, you will be starting to sink. You will be starting to have problems with the load you're carrying. You need to eliminate some things because you're over the line of safety. See, God has this formula for success. It sounds simple, but it's something that we can learn to do to keep us from overloading our lives, and it will help us to fill our tank with the right things as well. First of all, change your pace. Change your pace. I mentioned Sabbath just a moment ago. Rest and recreation are important. And if you're neglecting those kinds of things, then you need to recognize your situation is unhealthy and try to regain a godly ordered condition. We need to build margin into our schedule. Secondly, get some exercise. Regular physical activity will help us to relieve stress. It can get our mind off of those other things as well. Set some goals. Get into a gym or into some sort of exercise group. Buy a bicycle. Get out in nature. Go to Mayaca. Ride the Legacy Trail. Get some sleep. Sleep helps restore and helps protect your health. Eat right. A bag of chips and 2 or 3 cans of soda at 9 o'clock along with a piece of pie, not at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night with a piece of pie, is not a healthy pattern. Some of you obviously know someone who does that. You're pointing to people who do that right now. I can guarantee you that is not a formula for goodness in your life. Plan a healthy distraction. Distraction is a powerful tool that gets your mind thinking about other things. Watch a movie. Go to a dinner. Go for a hike. Go to a party. Go to a concert. Read the Bible devotional that we have and apply that daily truth to your life that day and each day. Those are things that will help you to begin to refill your tank when you're running low on the good stuff and overloaded with the bad stuff in an unhealthy way. Thirdly, burnout's a sign that I need to refocus my passion. It's a sign that I need to refocus my passion. I went to a nursing home 2 weeks ago, and when I went up to the desk, I was going to go visit someone from our church, and there's a sign-in sheet right there. So I asked the lady behind the counter what the room numbers were for the people I was going to see. And she gave me the wrong room numbers, then caught herself and said I couldn't see them very well. And I thought, well, small print, whatever, I can understand that. But I was back again this week, and she was the same one at the desk this time, and I was signing in again, and there was a guy standing there, and he was supposed to see somebody. So she calls this person up while I'm standing there. This other guy's next to me, and he has his name right there on his shirt with pretty big letters. And she gives him the wrong name as she is talking about him being there. And then he says, no, I'm so-and-so. I'm not the other guy. He says, oh, I couldn't see it very well. My eyes aren't very good. When your eyes are not very good, when your vision is off, it messes with your effectiveness, doesn't it? And when you're burning out, you don't see things the way God wants you to. You don't see spiritual truth as it applies to you. Our focus can get off, and we have a tendency to not notice things that we should be seeing. Paul addresses that in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, when he's writing to this church, and he is telling them that they need to focus on doing a certain thing. He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. How do you take captive a thought? Well, first of all, you need to recognize that thought that's creeping into your mind is something that is taking you away from what God's will for your life is. Those kinds of thoughts can derail your walk with Him. So in other words, you begin to recognize, wait a minute, this is a thought that is not right for me to have, to entertain, and so I have to take it captive. I have to grab a hold of it, and I have to tie it up, so to speak, so it does not begin to control my life. Several years ago, our men's group went on a retreat down to Isla Mirada in the Keys, and it was really a great trip. I went down there, and Gary Cox was the speaker for us, and there were these cards that got passed out, and those cards had a saying on them that all of us guys received. And I put mine in a briefcase, and I'd forgotten about it for a while. But as we were going to Indiana for Christmas, Sherry and I were going there, and I take my briefcase with me. This is the same briefcase I had down in the Keys on this trip. In fact, Scott Mikowski from our church was making fun of me because I had a briefcase, I had sandals with black socks on. Here I'm leaning up against a palm tree, and he takes my picture and puts it on Facebook, making fun of me. I really appreciated that a whole lot. So anyway, I'm carrying this same briefcase with me as we're getting on the airplane in Tampa. And as I'm getting on there, it's funny because there's a flight attendant right there, and she sees me, and she says, wow, I haven't seen a briefcase in years. Can I touch that? Sure. Let me get out my sandals and black socks while I'm at it. If I'm going to be out of it, I might as well be out of it all the way, I guess, here, huh? So anyway, I go ahead and I hand it to her, and she touches the briefcase. We go back, and on the way back out, we're joking about it again. And I get there to my dad's place, and I'm looking through the briefcase, and I find this card that's there. And the card has some really solid advice for us guys who were there. Let me show it to you right there. It says, if I listen to and obey God, I will not screw up my life. There's a lot of truth to that. If I listen to and obey God, I will not do that to my life. But when we are burning out, we do not listen very well. And we do not obey as well as we should. And that's a reminder to all of us that we need to be careful. When a person's burned out, they have a tendency to take unnecessary risks and to forget what's most important and to forget their core values and ignore them. I think that's why Paul was writing to the church there at Philippi. And, that's a good church. They'd done some fantastic things. But unfortunately, there were a couple of women there who were not getting along with each other. They'd worked well together before. They had great ministry things that they had accomplished together before. But now there was something that had happened, and they were opposed to each other. Now, the unfortunate part was not just them being opposed to each other, but the church was dividing up. It was choosing sides as to which side they were going to follow, either Euodia's side or Syntyche's side. And so Paul writes to them knowing this is destructive to the church. This is cancerous to the church. And he tells them that instead of showing up on Sundays and wondering what was going to go on that was wrong or bad or thinking gotta choose sides and be against that other side, he tells them to begin to change their way of thinking. He says to them in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." Rick Warren says, you have a choice of what you're going to focus on, either your purpose or your problems, God's power or your weakness, Christ or your circumstances. It's your choice. How do you refocus your passion? You ask God to help you remove stuff that's cluttering your activities and your thoughts that have captured your focus and taken it away from the good things, and you trust him to help you refocus your thinking. And God, you look to him into your life to point out where you haven't been doing as you've been designed to do. And you ask God, hey, look inside me. If there's something there that shouldn't be there, help me to know that and then deal with that. Psalm 139 says, "Search me, O God, know my heart, try me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any hurtful way in me." David is inviting the Lord to evaluate his motives, to see if there's anything that's depleting his soul and leaching into his life. He's asking God to focus on his life so he can turn focus on what is needed to be replaced with God's good ways. Let passion be focused toward learning to love other people again. People maybe you have neglected for a while. Have you neglected your family for a while? Or others that are important to you? Have you gotten so busy that you've forgotten that life needs some margin? That you've forgotten to be creative with a hobby? Learn to laugh again. Enjoy simple things again. Love God and serve the church. It's what he's gifted you to do, and there's great fulfillment in that as well. And then ask God for clarity of vision for what he's doing through the circumstances in your life. Look for what he's preparing for you, and also ask what he is preparing you for and what you can learn through that experience. And then lastly, burnout is a sign that I need to receive God's renewal. I need to receive God's renewal. The book of 1 Kings tells us a lot about a guy who was a prophet in Israel named Elijah. Elijah was this powerful prophet, the most well-known prophet that Israel ever had. And I'll tell you what, he had this time when he was ministering to the people that many of them had gone astray after false gods. And the main false god of that day was named Baal. And the time came when Elijah said, okay, we're going to have a showdown right here. We're going to change the dynamic of life here in Israel because it's gotten pretty bad. So he called out these 450 prophets of Baal and said, let's have this showdown up on Mount Carmel. You invite all your friends up here. We'll get everybody up here to watch what's going on. And we're going to have a couple of altars here. We're going to each have a bull to be placed on that offer to be sacrificed. And we're going to each ask our God to shoot down fire from heaven to destroy and to burn up that altar if he is the true God. So Elijah lets the prophets of Baal go first, and there they are at their altar, and they've got this bull on there. He's all cut up, and they're just waiting for fire to come down from heaven. They're marching around. They're crying out to their god Baal, and they're cutting themselves, and nothing is working, and Elijah's a little sarcastic with them. And then finally, after this has been going on almost all day, Elijah says, okay, step aside, boys, and let's see what the real God can do. And so he tells the people, hey, dig a trench around my altar and fill it with water. And then take water and pour it all on top of the bull and the wood that's on top of that altar. Make sure it's completely soaked and make sure that trench is completely full of water. Everything around it's all wet. And as soon as they did that, Elijah prayed and he said, God, send your fire down from heaven. And boom, just like that, that thing just exploded. Even the rocks were burnt up by the power of God at that point, showing that he is and was the one true God. And after that, the 450 prophets of Baal were put to death. Great victory. It was like Super Bowl Sunday for Elijah. His team won. You know, he was feeling really good about it. Everything's going great. But King Ahab, a bad guy, hears about it. And he goes back and he tells Queen Jezebel, also a bad lady. How many of you know somebody named Jezebel? How many of you know somebody who should be named Jezebel? Yeah, okay. We all know a few like that, don't we? Here we find it. She truly was Jezebel. And you know what she decides to do? She is going to put out this hit on Elijah. So Elijah's picture is all over Israel, wanted, a big reward and everything else. And so Elijah, he takes off running. He is scared for his life at this point. And he takes off, and he says after a little while, he sits underneath this broom tree, and he prays to God that he might die. He says, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. And he lays down under the tree and falls asleep. Here's a guy who's gone from this real emotional, spiritual victory high to this place where he just says, I'm done. Just take me out. I don't even want to be here anymore. I'm finished. What caused that? If you look at a lot of things that were happening in Elijah's life, you can kind of understand his burnt out condition right here. Here he is. He's had this great victory, but he's run. He's expended all kinds of energy. He's tired. He's emotionally spent. He knows that he's in trouble with the government right there. And he's done. An angel comes along and feeds him and gives him enough strength after touching him to travel 40 miles. And he goes to this cave. And at the cave, God shows some signs to Elijah. He brings some great wind, and then an earthquake, and then fire. But God wasn't in any of them. Then God began to whisper. And he said this to Elijah. He said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah spoke about his zeal for the Lord, how he'd been doing all this stuff for God. And he said, God, I'm the only one left in Israel who has been faithful to you. See, burnout can make you feel like you're the only one. That you alone are in the right. You alone know what's best. That's what burnout can begin to do to a person right here. I'm the only one, God. And God said, I still have 7,000 in Israel who haven't followed after Baal. Think about what's happening to Elijah right here. That were signs of his burnout. Fear. He's running for his life. Anger. I've had enough. Despair. Take my life. Fatigue. He fell asleep. Self-focused. I'm the only one. See, often depression and burnout can come after a spiritual high like Elijah had. And in his recovery, we find that it's in our darkest times that God makes his presence known to us most clearly. God is not going to quit, and he's not going to give up on you. If you are here today and you are feeling despair in your life, and you are feeling like, man, oh man, I don't think I'll ever get well again. I don't think I'll ever feel right within myself again. I want you to know that God is not giving up on you. God cares about you. God cares about your life, and he wants you to be your best. So God provided rest for Elijah. We need rest when we're going through a tough time. He provided comfort food for him, baked bread over hot coals and a jar of water. Connection, this angel touched him. Retreat, he got away and got to have some perspective. And then he got a more realistic load. But when we're burnt out, we think we've got to carry that load by ourselves, don't we? Even if somebody offers help to us, sometimes we, no, I got it. That's the way it works sometimes. But God says there's this guy named Elisha that I want you to get to know. And I want Elisha to come alongside you and minister alongside you. Elijah had someone else who was a friend. Someone else who came along and stood beside him and was also powerful in the Lord. And it enabled Elijah to have a different perspective. So what I would say to you about how to overcome, take care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. Remember that old song, oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Peter wrote, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Jesus told us to come unto him and he would give us rest. Believe that God has something better for you. Know that he knows what you're going through. Seek a change of pace. Help someone else. Rest, but also exercise. Count your blessings. And know this. know that your situation is not permanent. You can get through it. I can tell you, I thought my situation was permanent. I got through it. And I can tell you this, that you will get through it if you do these things I've been talking about today, and if you take some time and do the things that God is calling for you in your life. He is for you. He wants your best. He knows your highest highs, and he also knows your lowest lows, and he will never leave you or forsake you. And if you take a step towards him, he promises he will come to you as well. Maybe today there's somebody here who needs to take that very first step in making Jesus Christ your Lord and your Savior, enabling him to be the leader of your life, the one who can take charge, so to speak, the one who is God in the flesh, who came here and lived a perfect life and died on a cross and then raised up on the third day and is in heaven right now, but is coming back someday. Maybe today's the day that you need to step forth and say, I want to surrender my life to him. It's also very likely that maybe if you're going through a time of burnout, you just need some prayer. And I'd like to invite you to come up today so I can pray for you as well if that's what you're going through. Let's stand together. Let's sing this song. And if you have a decision to make, either for Christ or for prayer, just come up and join me.